All right, we are live. This is Joe, the Wealth Architect, and we are about to talk about spending. A big, important topic, right? And this is Voices from the Grind, uh, our podcast where we talk to people impacted by the criminal justice system, such as myself, and we talk about how we think about money, how we experience money, and how to manage it in such a way that we could build wealth, right? Not just for ourselves, but for other generations, right? And I am happy to have a good friend of mine, Kenny Ennis, who is I've known him for what 30 years now. It's crazy when you think about it. We've been through the trenches, right, on the inside and the outside, and so we're gonna talk about spending. We're gonna really dive in. But before we do, Kenny, thank you for being on the show, and just introduce yourself and talk to the audience a little bit. Mhm. Yeah. Hmm. 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 Right. Hmm. Okay. Okay, okay. I definitely appreciate that. You're not alone, so don't feel bad. You're not alone. And I have my moments, I don't tend to splurge, like I did, when I was making fast money years ago. But there's some things I'm like, after the fact, I'm like, why did I buy that? And the truth is that some things, as you and I've talked about, the whole idea of play money. So some things are just that. It is for recreation. It is for treating yourself. Uh, but the whole thing is to be mindful, right? So we're going to get into all of that. So thanks for sharing that. The whole piece. About spending, because before we can be disciplined with saving and investing, we need to get our spending under control. So now they can happen simultaneously, obviously, right? With, like you mentioned, the SSI method. The SSI method is a three-part wealth building framework that I developed a few years ago. And my book is based on it. My second book, the new SSI method, is based on that and lays out the thinking behind the framework and then actual practical steps to developing a spending plan, a savings plan, and an investing plan. So thanks for bringing that up. Of course, we were going to talk about it, but yeah. So let's dive in. Let's talk about the spending. Why do you? What would you say has been your relationship in general with money? When I say relationship, meaning obviously how you spend, save, invest, or anything like that, but also your thinking behind it. What has been over the course of your life, your thinking about money? And then the second part of it is, do you think your incarceration in any way changed, right? Altered the way you think about money? Mhm, 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 mhm. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. 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 Right. Hmm. 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 Right. Hmm. Hmm. Right. Hmm. 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 With Olympic. Hmm. Right. So let me ask you this. Now, you raised before we go dive deeper. Do you think the fact that you, like myself, and like so many people, whether they're impacted by the criminal justice system or not, do you think the fact that there was scarcity, right? There wasn't a lot of material uh, things growing up, right? Meaning in terms that there wasn't a lot of money, a lot of, like I said, it was a struggle. Your dad wasn't there, uh, like mine, right? So it's mostly your mom and other people, other family members picking up, with moms, I'm saying, struggle with, right? In terms of raising, like you said, seven kids. My mother had five, right? And so, but do you think that those difficult times uh, financially that they played an early at such an early stage, do you think that they played a part in how you spent, let's say, let's start when you were young, before, going to prison, for example, right? Let's say as a young adult, even, right, being in the streets, whatever that looked like, right? Do you think that when you think about it now, that there was like a trajectory, so to speak, in terms of your spending patterns or habits? Mm-hmm. 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 It was always- Mhm. 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 Right. Mhm. Mhm. Right. Mhm. 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 Right. Mm. Mhm. Right. Hmm. Hmm. No, still that stuff is scary. You know what I'm saying? I've been on probation before. You like, there's always the threat of going to jail when you're on probation, right? But no, so that's it's a good point that you raised that, um, and I like the way you framed it, like in a historical context, right? Meaning that it does matter when you're born, right? What you're exposed to. I mean, I'm 10 years younger than you, so some of the things that I, learned about whatever, in other words, because even, it's 10 years is 10 years, however you look at it. And so that there are some things that what weren't around, for example, when you were a teenager, for example, than when I was, and vice versa for people like now, growing up with social media, for example, right? People want to invest, they go right on their phone. You can use almost any platform has an app, but let's just talk about Robinhood, for example. Robinhood democratized investing. They even gamified it, made it fun. So kids, they're like, oh yeah, I know a lot of people who don't have a lot invested, but they'll say, "Oh, I got Bitcoin," because they're looking for the next, the next, gold rush, so to speak, right? But and that's not the way to think. But my point is that because they grew up in an era when, uh, or where you can easily set up an account like in 5 minutes, like literally 5 minutes, and own some shares. And some of those platforms, like Robinhood, will give you a share. Right? They'll say we'll give you a share of. It can be one of these, and it might be Google, might be this, whatever it is. Uh, and so, like I said, democratize it in a way that prior to Robinhood coming on the scene, and I've watched this in my 9 years of being home, right? I've watched how other platforms like Chase and some of the, other banking and other financial platforms, they used to charge for buying and selling, for trading, right? With Robinhood, with Fidelity, which I use now, and SoFi and all these other platforms, I can't think of any that charges for the transaction of selling. Now they make some money, right? They're gonna make some money, but it's not off of your buying and selling shares. So anyway, I just said to say that the point that you raised about growing up, when you grew up, when there weren't a lot of opportunities, right? People have been investing for years, right? But in terms of employment and exposure to financial literacy, that was not a thing. It wasn't even a thing when I was coming up, right? I thought of it as, to be honest, something for white folks. That's what I thought. I heard of, you hear of stocks and bonds, right? I came up in the 80s, right? Meaning born in 70, but my teen years was in the 80s, whereas yours, that was your 20s, right? And um, yeah, my brother had some shares because he won a lawsuit, so he had a couple shares of stocks, but he didn't know what he had. He ended up, selling it, and he didn't know what the hell he had, right? So yeah, so that plays a big part. But I just want to before we move on, just give another shout out. You're listening to Voices from the Grind. This is your boy Joe, the Wealth Architect, and we are here with Kenny Ennis, good friend of mine, and we're talking about spending and how our childhood formative years impact and influence how we spend, why we spend, even maybe what we spend it on sometimes, right? And so it's important for us to realize that we have these money scripts, right? Money by itself like doesn't control us, so to speak. It's our mindset, it's our attitudes, beliefs that dictate how we spend our money. So again, this is Joe, the Wealth Architect, Voices from Beyond, from the Grind, and you can also find us on YouTube, right? On YouTube, Think Outside the Cell. You can find us on other platforms as well, Instagram, TikTok, all of the major platforms. Just wanted to shout shout those out. So yeah, so getting back to you, Kenny. No, that's a really good point. That what we because what you're getting at is two things. One is that when we're born or what we're exposed to plays a big part in what we view as opportunities. Just think about it. Right? Like I said, there was no Robin Hood. There was a lot of these platforms weren't around 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so they could not be perceived as opportunities. Now they are, right? And with YouTube, for example, and all the other platforms as well, but especially YouTube because it's visual, mostly visual, all visual, right? And auditory, that people we now can see inside people's mansions, their like how they living and all this other stuff, and it really gets people worked up. When I in the '80s, I don't know if you remember, they had Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Yeah, right. Robin Leach, and I used to watch him religiously. Exactly. Exactly. And that was our window, so to speak, into how other people live. Now the thing is, we never, most of us, didn't see that as a possibility for ourselves, right? We lived vicariously through others, right? But for most of us, the seed wasn't planted for a number of reasons, but the seed wasn't planted that, oh, I can have that too, if I wanted to, right? I think I told myself that. I didn't think of it deeply, but when I saw Lifestyles of Rich and Famous, not that I thought I could have that, because that was like decadent wealth. You know, people on yachts and all. So I didn't see that. I can see that now, but I didn't see that then. But I was like I said, living vicariously through the images that I saw on the screen. I was like, wow, people actually live like that. You know, kind of reminds me, even though it's a little different, of different strokes, right? Because that was something I grew up with as well. So you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So, but yeah, so it's an interesting thing. So, but getting back to what you was talking about, so you grew up mostly. Well, you moved from Brooklyn, right? You moved from Brooklyn to Queens. How old were you then? You was 11. Okay. Hmm. 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 Right. Yeah. Right. I pack bags. That's a nice little hustle. Yeah. Hmm. Right. And some other people. Yeah. Hmm. 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 Expound on that. When you say leave you vulnerable, meaning like entices us. Is that what you mean? Hmm. Right. Hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. No. No, I get it. Get it. Hmm. That's funny. Mm-hmm. Right. Hmm. Mhm. Mhm. Right, right. Taxes is no joke. Right. Mhm. Mhm. Right, right, right. Yeah. No, it's funny. You keep all the money. No, it's funny you say that. One thing that that came up for me was the movie Scarface. Right? And that was like in '84, I think, or something like that. And I remember, what was it, '82? Damn, I thought it was later. I probably saw it in '83, '84. Yeah, I think I saw it around '83, '84. And I saw it, I was in Jamaica, Queens, too. It's funny. So we lived, let me see, '83, '84. We lived in East New York. I went to my homeboy's uncle's house. He owned a house in Jamaica. Nice, nice house, nice area, stuff like that. Right. So that was a step up, like you said, because I mean, you mentioned about step up. So going from East New York, from the projects, and then I was visiting, but still, it's like, wow, this is damn black man live like this. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's different. Quiet. He got his vehicle. You know what I'm saying? So I never forget. You know, we went there several times. I would go with my friend, and uh, and we watched Scarface one day. I don't know why he let us watch it. You know what I'm saying? I'm not. You know, I mean, it still is a good movie, but we were impressionable. So I really do believe I'm not blaming the movie for my actions for later on, you know, end up selling drugs and stuff like that. But I think on some level it did plant the seed. I think it planted the seed because it was such a moving flick. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like Al Pacino really played that, right? And he was very convincing. Uh, we're talking '80s during the crack era. You know, well, the movie crack wasn't out yet when I saw it, but when it did come out, you know, when the epidemic, spread and all of that, I think the seed had been planted. Like you got to be tough, you got to take no shit, you got to, all that type of stuff, and like you got to hold it down. You got to hold it down. Now, I wasn't like him. I wasn't trying to be Scarface and jealous, with his sister. He was ruthless, right? So I wasn't like that. I never, took it there. But I just say it to say that whether it's lifestyles of the rich and famous, whether it's dynasty, whatever, how media, right? The media, whether it's movies and news and all those things, and our environment, right? The role that they play in our spending. And the reason why I'm getting into all this before we dive into, uh, some of the more concrete things is because it's important for us to trace our thinking. They didn't just come out of nowhere, right? You know what I'm saying? And if we don't trace and we start seeing what are some of the emotional, psychological kind of underpinnings of our behavior, then we'll never get control of it. Right. For me, for example, one of the things that I think I still, and I'm sure there are lots of people who, especially including people who are very wealthy, but something that always like a tape that plays in my mind is the idea of being poor, so to speak, right? That's the not so much the stigma of it, but I'm gonna say the sting of it, right? We went through a period when my mom's uh, began abusing drugs during the crack epidemic, and it devastated us. Devastated. We were already, like I said, poor, materially poor, right? There was love in the household and all that. I felt that. Um, but once she became addicted, didn't see much of her. I took to the streets. My other siblings went through stuff. Some siblings got taken, all that, right? It was a serious, serious thing. And my going to the streets and committing crime was in response to that. 'Cause I was a very good student, right? Aspirations of, my story, aspirations of being a pilot, an airline pilot, had the aptitude for it, took the ASVAB test, passed it, at 16. I just was good student, good, and I take tests, well. But I was 15 years old when my mom became addicted. So that drew me, to the streets. And so for me, even to this day, at 55, right, we're talking 40 years later, it's hard to believe that, right? The idea um, of struggling and being, and not so much being poor, but the weight of it, the weight of it. You know what I'm saying? It's something that I think on some level still drives my behavior. I'll say one other thing on that. I'll never forget how, and I write about this in my first book, Think Outside the Cell, an entrepreneur's guide for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. I never forget when I was in Elmira, uh, upstate New York prison, for those who are listening who may be in other states. Um, and I was in the beginning of doing 25 years to life. I had just been sentenced, right? So I had been in the system for about a year and maybe 3 or 4 months or something like that, and went from one prison to then go to Elmira to be processed for this for this other crime that for this other crime. I'll just say that, and they had begun, meaning the Department of Corrections, New York State Department of Corrections, in '92. I remember because I came in the system in '92, and they had just instituted the damn, what is it that they call it? It's basically a tax, but what's the word? I can't think of. Well, no, not that one. The one for it economy, but basically it was a fee, right? And you had to, and everybody had to pay. I just can't think of the name. No, I'm talking about when you first come in the system, right? I think it's now it may be like $300. I think then it was whatever it was, but it was a couple hundred. Yeah, something like that, some type of court fee, and it wasn't thousands of dollars or anything like that. It was a couple $100, two, three, whatever $100. But just that right there was a sting to me, right? Meaning going to what you're saying. I knew how to make money. Like I know how to hustle, I know how to make money, I know how to work too. I had jobs, right? But I didn't know how to manage my money. I had no frame of reference whatsoever. Like you said, if I wanted something, I got it, right? You may keep a couple thousand in your pockets, a couple hundred, sometimes thousands, because I made money, right? But I didn't. I had no system enough to re-up, to start the process all over again, right? That's what you do, right? And so that's exactly it. And so it was sitting in a prison cell in Elmira in 1993 with the surcharge. That's what it was called. I couldn't think of the name. Right, the surcharge, right? So I didn't know. I mean, I had heard about it when I was in Auburn, a different prison, when I first went upstate. So I started there. That's when the New York State legislators passed it. So the Department of Corrections was just executing on what the law said, right? And so I had a couple $100 in my account from Auburn to Elmira, and because it was a different case, because I had one, I was on probation, and now this new case was a big case, but would later be sentenced to 25 years to life. uh, it was, as we call it, a turnaround. So I got the search. So now, the first time when I came up, they didn't, if I remember correctly, I'm not sure, but I don't think they had the surcharge. Or if they did, I had the money in my account. But now a year later, yeah, they didn't. Oh, wow. Right, exactly. Exactly. But that's the point, exactly. So that's what happened with me. And from that point, when they had the surcharge and it wiped my little account out. That was it. Now and I felt, I'm be honest, I felt like like an idiot. Yeah, I definitely felt like I was robbed. No, that was like, damn, I'm not proud of it, but I've done, stuff that I regret. And I'm like, wow, damn, they robbed me. Without a gun. I couldn't even do nothing without a weapon. right? And not only that, I didn't have any extra money. I had to get on the phone and call folks. And that was for me on a personal level. I'm glad I had people, but but still, that was humbling. That was humbling. Very, very humbling. And I said to myself, from that point, this is 93. I said, never again, man. I don't like that feeling, you know, dudes, I mean, I'm walking, selling, looking or whatever, and yeah, dudes that I had, I was in reception at the time in 93, so not fully into, I ended up staying there for 2 years. Um, but I was in reception and said he was going to sort out, where they were going to, have me serve out my time. And people that bonded with. I didn't know them from the outside, but I bonded with, and they saw that I was like dejected and stuff, and so they would offer me, "Oh, you want some soap? You want this?" And that. Man, I felt like a charity case, man. That was humbling, man. That was humbling. That was humbling because remember all the stuff that I had from Auburn, I had to get rid of. Now, I did 1 year there, but I'm talking about everything from my boots. I had Timberland boots. I had silk shirts. I, all this other stuff. I'm young, so I'm trying to, whatever. And I had to get rid of it. I had to get rid of it. So I literally was starting from scratch with a Bible, books, legal work, things like that. And that was tough. That was really tough. So I say all that to say that's a long-winded way of saying that for me, the light bulb began to go off in terms of that I really need to like get this money thing under control. I said I can't experience this again. I don't like this feeling. And how am I going to get through all this time with no money, right? Like uh, and we know how it is. Some family members come through, others don't. So you can't always depend on that. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. So for me, like I said, that's when the seed was kind of planted. And then, by the next year, 1994, I really started getting into personal finance. Really start thinking about my life and reflecting on what got me to that point, and in terms of behaviors, but also attitudes, who I associated with, all those type of things. Do a lot of introspection when you're inside. At least some of us do. And so yeah, so that was it for me. So all right, so you said that you moved from Brooklyn to Queens, right? You saw people in the neighborhood, uh, presumably some were older, and they making money. You seeing moves being made, right? And particularly, back, your era, marijuana was, I remember we had trade bags, nickel bags, right, right, hmm 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 right, 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 hmm, right. No, it takes over. It becomes a lifestyle. You don't think anything of it. You don't think anything of it. And then, the 70s, especially leading up to the crack era, you had, cocaine was big. I remember, I didn't mess around with it, anything like that, uh, meaning, as like a teenager. Anything like that. Right, right. That's how I was. No, no, exactly. No, I know. It had a certain prestige to it. It's the way they was. the way they presented it. Nah, I know you said because like when I was, even in the '90s, late '80s and early '90s, now you're talking the '70s and '80s, so like that. But even then, it was like not to get into a whole drug thing, but it was easily at least $100 a gram or something like that. We're talking the late '80s, early '90s. So I can imagine what it was even earlier than that, right? Whereas weed, $5, you can get, like I said, a nickel bag, get a trade bag. My uncles used to go to the weed spot. I think I must have been probably, I don't know, 14, maybe 13, I don't know, but at least 14, something like that. I smoked a little bit with my uncles, and I'm like coughing. I'm like, oh man, you feel nice. You feel like you've grown, all that type of stuff. And then, like I said, it becomes a thing. But yeah, so now bring it back to the spending, right? So grow up around people making money the way they made money. I mean, some people worked obviously, and then others hustled. They sold drugs, they robbed, people made money, and so like you, I grew up around that, and we take our cues often, right? Some of us are more impressionable than others, but ultimately we take our cues from the people we grew up around. So, what would you, in terms of spending, how would you say other people spend? Meaning, because you talked about how, like, even now, like with you, we know the difference between wants and needs, right? Most of us, right? We tell ourselves, we lie to ourselves and say that something that we want, we'll say it's a need, or I need this, right? And we'll do that for a lot of things. Or we just take an approach that I earned it, right? I deserve it. I did all that time, whatever the money scripts, and we'll get into that in a few, whatever they are. But what about other people? Did you observe um, how other people spent their money? Meaning, as you grew up, what was how? Hmm. 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 Wow. Mm, 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 hmm. Right. Mhm. Right. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Your lifestyle, exactly. Exactly. Right. They want people. Exactly. Exactly. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. No, that's a good. That's important because like you said, sometimes we need outside intervention, right? Someone to say, "Yo, why do you spend like that? Let me show you another way so that yes, you can have some of the things you want, not only the things you need, but you can have it over a longer period of time if you allocate this money, if you divide it in such a way that you could make it. I mean, we weren't taught like that, but that you could make some of it work for you, so that you could instead of you working for it, so that you could then spend on a more continuous basis, right? So it's a more future focused way of thinking about money instead of a present, way of thinking about money. And I didn't think like that. And I'm just saying that I think like that now, but I think that's part of the problem is like you said, when we don't have we, experiences or observations of people managing their money well, whatever amount they have, right? When you see them struggling, like I did, we used to have to go down. We lived on the second floor in the projects. My grandmother would have us go downstairs. Everything have me go downstairs and borrow eggs, borrow sugar, borrow this, and they pay it back. You know what I'm saying? So I respect that honor system. I do respect that. But I'm like, and I didn't like doing it, but grandma said go down, what I'm gonna say, you know what I'm saying? And they didn't think nothing of it. It was a whole bunch of us in the household. But to your point, it was what we saw was a lot of lack. And so when you did get money, you splurge because you can. You feel like you can. And when you don't have a plan, in this instance, a spending plan, right? Meaning some basically, you were in the military. It's like giving your money orders, saying this is how you got to think of it like that. Your money is your army. Yeah, you gotta control it. You gonna just send them out, in the field with no guidance? We wouldn't do that. Who would do that you know what I'm saying? So if you start saying, I want them not only to come back, you know what I'm saying? If you want to use military parlance, right? Not only to come back, but to bring other people, right? To bring, you know what I'm saying? So that my wealth is increased, right? So that's, I mean, I just use a military metaphor because I know your background. But my point is that we need to begin, and it's never too late. I'm telling you, it's never too late. Start with whatever we got. I say to you, I say to Jamal, and my other long time friends and brothers that it really is not too late. You can start with $50, $100, whatever the case might be, to begin allocating some monies into investing, some into saving as well. Saving is more about preservation, right? It's not about growth. Right? It's about preserving, getting a little bit of interest. It's there. It's in the bank. It's losing value. It is losing purchasing power, but it's somewhat preserving your money, right? Whereas investing, your money is working for you. You were going to say something? Mm-hmm. 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 Right. 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 I got you. Right. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to grab it. Exactly, exactly. And I think there's pros and cons. Let me just say with real estate, pros and cons with investing in the stock market. Um, yeah, so I'll just say that I'm mostly in the stock market, but I do have some timeshares, and my wife and I intend, which is different than owning a property. I will say that. So, but next year I intend to get into like the real estate, go deeper into that because the key to wealth, what I've learned um, over the last 30 years, is that there are three main tracks, so to speak. One is entrepreneurship, you can make the most money, right? Most all the billionaires, anybody you see is a billionaire, it's a business. They started a business, right? It's no secret, right? You know what I'm saying? Whether it's the Rockefellers, whether it's the Carnegies, the Mellons, it's business. It's business, right? So that's the number one. I think the second one I would say is real estate. And I don't mean one or two properties. I'm talking about like a little empire, so to speak, right? That is the way. There's a lot of tax benefits to investing in real estate, and that's by design, right? The laws were written uh, not necessarily by the rich, but for the rich. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's all about ownership. And then the third one is the stock market, right? Now, sometimes you can make more money in stock market than in real estate. If you are, let's say, a small real estate owner, uh, you know, then you can probably make more money in the stock market, depending on what you're investing. Based on my research, I have days where I make over $1,000 easily, easily. The stock market. I don't spend it. I just watch it grow, and watch it compound, and that's the beauty of it. So one day, for example, um, just the comparison with like real estate. Like I said, real estate you could definitely, if you have a nice portfolio, then you can make a lot of money. Real estate if you manage them well and all that, right? You treat it as a business, right? Not as a hobby or anything like that. But as far as investing, let's say like Amazon, for example, Netflix, some of those type of stocks. I own some of those in addition to owning the broader market. So those individual stocks, sometimes they go up 2, 3% a day. Just the other day, I think I forgot it was one of my investments. I think it was. I can't even remember because it's hard to keep up with all of them. But one of them went up like 8% in one day. You're not going to get that in real estate. That's why I mentioned that. You're not going to, your money's not going to go up 8% in one day in real estate. Your money is not going to go up like that in the bank account. I don't care what type of bank account you have, right? So yeah, so that's what I mean. Now it may go down the next day or whatever, but the point is you want to have your money working for you. And as you mentioned, we haven't been taught this stuff. So instead, we spend all our life energy, 20, 30, 40 or more years trading our time for money because that's what we were taught. You go to school, you get a good education, you be the best employee you can be, blah blah blah, and and all this other stuff. Wealthy people don't think like that at all. They think the exact opposite. They rather be on vacation. They rather pay. One, they're going to put their money to work. Their money is not in savings account. They own shares of the bank, right? Which any of us can do, but they're not going to be just keeping hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in a bank account because the bank is in the business for themselves, right? They take your money, loan it out to other people at 10, 20, 30 times, what they will give you in interest, right? So that's just, and it's legal, right? It's set up like that legal. It's not, to me, it's not ethical, right? Or moral, but who am I to say it's legal? They're not breaking the laws, right? That's how the money changes, as they say, going back to Italy and as far as the European model, that's how they've been doing it, right? Where they have a fractional, what they call a fractional model that they use, so they can take $1 that I put in the bank, and they can flip it, so to speak, 9 times, 9 times the same dollar, right? And nobody else can do that unless you're in the drug trade or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, and they got a license to do this, right? So it's really something to think about. But again, I just want to, like I said, stay on point. So I think the main thing is how do we rebuild our financial discipline after incarceration, right? Because I want to make sure I tie that in, right? Because like I spent a significant amount of time in prison, and so we want to think now that it's one thing to talk about our upbringing, our money scripts, and things like that, but how do we rebuild our financial discipline or build? Because some of us didn't have it to begin with, right? Like I didn't have it to begin with. I developed it while I was inside. As I started reading about personal finance, you remember going back to 95, 96, I had the Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazines. I had all this. Yeah, yeah, magazine. Yeah, exactly. I love that. I did that for years and years. Exactly. Those are my main two. And then I got the personal finance, and I would look and I said, "Oh, let me try this one." That was a big one. I forgot how I came across it. I think it was in Elmira, but that really kept me abreast of new laws as it pertained to investing. When index funds came on the scene, they weren't always around. They were while we was upstate in prison. That's when they came into existence. So I read about. It. I said, "Oh, wow." ETFs and how they're different than regular mutual funds and all that. So that was all part of my knowledge, my education, reading books about it, ordering books, and the whole thing, immerse myself in it. So that's how I was doing it. Yeah, and so that's why for me it was easy to come home and had that as a part of the plan, no question about it. So I saved up first, saved up about a year, so about 20,000, something like that. And then I said, okay, now it's time to invest. Now it's time to make this money really work, you know. Um, so that's how it goes. But let's, like I said, so before we get into rebuilding financial discipline, I do want to talk about money scripts, though, right? Because we want to unpack this a little bit. So we might go a little bit over 5 minutes over, right? But so let's talk about money scripts. So when I say money script, I'm talking about these subconscious beliefs that we have about money. That's like money doesn't grow on trees. Money is the root of all evil. There's a whole bunch of sayings that we've internalized. Some of us have internalized. They're playing out in our lives now. We don't even realize it. So, can you think of one or two things that, as you think about how you spend now, what what is it that you think in terms of psychology, right? That may inform your thinking. Is it, for example, is it um, as you were growing up? Is it similar? Like, well, I don't have much. I need to treat myself. I've been away. I mean, think about, because that's important. In order to change that, the behavior, you got to first just say, what tape is being played here? What am I telling myself? So, what is Kenny telling himself? Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Right, right, exactly, right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Exactly. The earlier the better. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Exactly. Right. Invest it. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. Mhm. Exactly. No, exactly. Exactly. Or more. No, exactly. Exactly. So you said a couple things. I want to try to unpack a few, and then we'll wrap it up in a few minutes. um, so one is this: I strongly advise using plastic, meaning credit card and debit card. Credit card first, because you get points, obviously, right? Also, if something happens to your credit card, you can call it in, right? You call it in, you lose it, you get robbed, anything crazy happen or something, you can call it. Debit card is different. It's coming, money coming straight out your checking account. So if you lose it or something like that, you could be done with right. You might not get it back. So the thing is this: you want to be able to track your spending. In order to control it, you need to track it, right? There's a saying, Peter Drucker, right? He was a management guru, as they say, and he had a saying: "You can't manage what you don't measure." So if you don't measure your money, you don't see where it's going, then how are you going to manage it? You can say, oh yeah, I bring home $1,500, $2,000, 3,000, whatever, every 2 weeks. But now you know that, and then you just willy nilly just pay off bills, and then like you said, the difference, and this may go to the psychology as a young person when you said, you would give money to your mother, you would do this, that, and then the rest is you. So that behavior, probably has carried forward, to the 60 something year old Kenny, where it's like, okay, I paid, and a lot of people, all right, I paid the rent, I paid this, that, okay, I got $500, I got 700, I got 1,000, whatever, and now I'm just gonna do me, right? In other words, that's my money, I earned it, right? That's the attitude, and what we want to say is this, because you said something that's really important. Words are very, very, very important, and when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to spending, those type of things, when we hear the word budget, many of us hear restrictions, limitations, sacrifice, right? Those are the three prominent words that come up, right? And when and so and those make you feel hemmed in, so to speak, right? Especially coming in from prison, you want to spread your wings. Think about it, the psychology and the emotional aspect. But now I challenge you, I'm saying you, right? In terms of spending, because I want this session to trigger a thought and begin a transformation, really. Words are important. So when you say, because you're not alone, so many people think, when we say budget, no, I know where my money's going. People start resisting. They don't even want to think budget. It's like they feel like they're in a straitjacket or something like that, right? Right? When the truth is that when you have a spending plan, like I said, you're putting your money to work. You are in charge, not the money. You're the general, so to speak, giving orders to your money, right? And it's not about sacrifice. And I'd like you to do this at some point, and we can talk about it when you and I see each other face to face. Those words, sacrifice, right? Not that sacrifice is a bad word, but in the context of money, it's often felt that way. It's often perceived that way, and whatever meaning we give to anything shapes our understanding of things, shapes our behavior, and all of that. So I, for example, instead of seeing having a spending plan or a budget as restrictive, I see it as a tool or a means to think long term, allocate my money in such a way that I get to live now in a comfortable way, but also I get to live a comfortable way for as long as I can. That's different. Live long, exactly. So instead of sacrifice, I see spending within the context of the SSI method and a spending plan as a way to invest, not as a sacrifice. I'm investing in my future. When we go to school, we go to college, that's what? A sacrifice. But we don't say that. We think of it as an investment, right? I'm going to school for 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever, this and that, so that on the other side of that, I can have the lifestyle I want. We got to look at money the same way, right? We don't say, "Oh, I'm just wasting my time and squandering, my time in school," just because somebody told me. We see it as an investment. Yes, you could say it's a sacrifice because you're giving up your time and all this stuff, but you're acquiring skills, knowledge, information, social networks, all of that stuff, that's going to make you better off in the long run. We got to see money the same ways. So what I challenge you to do is to write down, seriously, when you get time, write down money scripts, right? Write down a few things that come to mind when you think of money, for example, and also think of when it comes to spending and budgeting, like the terms I use, maybe you use some other words, write down a few, like an exercise, write down a few words of how you honestly think about budgeting and spending, not how, excuse me, not how I want you to think or somebody else think you should think, how you actually think. And then write on the other side of it, like you can draw the line, right? On the left side, you write down the ways you have been thinking about it. And then on the right side, you get to shift. And I say you get to because at the end of the day, we're in control, right? I'm no different than you. I changed my thinking. I changed my thinking. So my behavior reflects it. That's it. That's it. So then on the right side, write down some things, a different mindset, a different money script when it comes to budgeting and stuff like that. So with that said, like I said, I don't want to keep you much longer. We scratched the surface. Uh, we didn't get so much into rebuilding the financial discipline, but this is part of it. Part of it is understanding your money script and then thinking about how you can rewrite your money scripts. You can use, and what that means is you have to use different words. When I'm spending my money, I'm conscious and I'm thinking, because I've been doing it so long. All right, this is investment money. This is going to be saved. Whenever I got a check or stuff like that, it was broken up, right? This is to pay down debt. This is uh, uh, going in a savings account as a cushion, and this is going in investment. Just like how you said, whenever I got bonuses, whenever we got raises, anything like that, I put more towards investing. And the money and it shows now. That's what I'm saying. That's why I've been able to for almost 6 months now just do me. Not a lot of people can do that. Think about it. Not a lot. Now, I'm not saying, and I'm not splurging. I'm not splurging. I haven't changed my lifestyle, anything like that. I made it work for me. Exactly. 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 No, exactly, exactly. And the goal is for it to be, especially with the business, is for it to be for the rest of my life and to show other people how to do the same thing because people are doing it. And more black folks are doing it too. More black folks. I'm happy about that. But anyway, man, I appreciate you coming on. I don't want to keep you much longer. It's definitely been a pleasure. And we'll have other people, other people who would like to be on the podcast. Like I said, we'll talk about one of the three different pillars, either spending, saving, or investing. And yeah, this is all part of building our community and building black excellence and black wealth. So with that said, man, I appreciate you, Kenny, and we'll get up soon. All right, all right. Yep, stay up. Yep. All right, let me close this out.